Hey guys, welcome to week 2 of my journey of discovery as seen through my African eyes. Thanks so much for all of you who have been a part of this journey, who are enjoying it. Every time we read a chapter, your responses, your reactions, your questions, your points. Thank you so much for all of that. You know, the book is available if you want it. You can go to Prestige Bookshop in the CBD in Nairobi. Textbook Center also is selling it. Nuria Books online. It's also available, folks. Make sure you pick up a copy and follow us as we go through a chapter a day. Now, before we go to this next phase, and I've been talking a lot about West Africa, so I want to bring it closer back home, and I'll do that in a moment. But first, let me not forget that this book would not be possible had it been for a couple of people who helped me edit this story, dot the I's and cross the T's. I'm talking about Dr. Anyango Odhiambo. Amazing woman who had spent a lot of her life in California, in LA, during the times of, she literally grew up there. And then she spent a lot of time, like 20 years in Southeast Asia and Vietnam. Very, very smart, brilliant, switched on woman. She helped me. We spent many nights going through this book, making sure that each chapter flowed the way it is. And of course, her brother, many of you know him, Oyunga Pala. He also was part of the edit team. And you guys, I owe you for life. I'm indebted to you. Thanks so much for that. And for making this come to life. And it will come to life as we continue on telling the stories. Today, I'm going to take you deep into Zaire, as it was known then. Today is known as the Democratic Republic of Congo. By the way, at independence in 1960, it was known as the Democratic Republic of Congo. Then 5 years later, many of you know the story. Patrice Lumumba was assassinated. Mobutu took over. He changed the name of the country from Democratic Republic of Congo to Zaire. He would rule the country for the next 32 years. And in that time, Western critics coined a phrase that described the Africa of that time. They called it a kleptocracy, a government run by thieves. That was Mobutu's Zaire. Later on in 1997, a rebel movement came out consisting of mostly child soldiers. They called them the Batoto. Those are the kids who wore the oversized army uniforms and gumboots, literally marching across the length of the Congo. By the way, the Congo, if you were to put all of Western Europe, take that, all of Western Europe, fit it in the Congo, as in DRC, it would fit and there'll be room left over. That's how large Africa's third biggest country is. So, of course, the biggest was Sudan then, before it broke up into Sudan and South Sudan. Second biggest was Algeria. DRC, third largest. So, Mobutu rules for 32 years. There's a rebel movement making its way from the east all the way to Kinshasa. They make it into Kinshasa in May 1997. Mobutu tries to negotiate. He gets President Nelson Mandela then and the rebel leader, Laurent Kabila, together to a meeting in a place called Point Noir. They meet. There's no agreement. Mobutu flees the country, ends up in Morocco, where he would later die because he had prostate cancer at the time. He would later die and would be buried in a nondescript Christian cemetery. Morocco is mostly Muslim. He would be buried in a nondescript Christian cemetery. And that was it for one of Africa's most well-known strongmen of the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. They called himself Mobutu Sese Seko Kukumbengu Wazabanga. How do I remember that? Because it was hammered into us time and again who this person was growing up. By the way, it literally means he's the only cock that crows. Mobutu Sese Seko Kukumbengu Wazabanga. The only cock that crows, that grows from village to village, conquering each time. Can you imagine? A man's title dies in a nondescript cemetery, forgotten. So anyway, Laurent Kabila takes over, and he's there for about 3.5 years before he is assassinated by his own bodyguards in January 16th, 2001. And then the country, again, was in a crisis. And the military decided, you know what, the only person who can take over from Laurent Kabila would be his son, Joseph Kabila, who was then the chief of general staff in charge of the entire military. And he did. And that's where we pick up this story. By the way, the greatest irony about the Congo, by far, the wealthiest country on the entire continent. It has huge deposits of gold, diamonds, copper, cobalt. There's an element in every cell phone called coltan that can only be found in the DRC. The uranium that was used in Nagasaki in World War II, that came from the Congo. Can you imagine? The richest country, bar none, and I'm not even talking about the forest, the waters, all other resources, natural resources. This is just the minerals, and yet the most unstable the country has gone through. The worst. When I covered the Congo back in the early 2000s, imagine that a country as large as all of Western Europe only had 500 kilometers of roads. 500 kilometers. So getting from one part of the Congo to the other was next to impossible. You couldn't drive, first of all. There were no roads. So you had to fly from place to place. And it was a nightmare. So here we are. I'm in Kinshasa. We hear about this story. There is a hospital in a place called Bukavu, some 2,000 kilometers away. By the way, that's like from Mombasa to Kampala. 2,000 kilometers away, where there's a lone doctor who treats victims of mass rape. And I tell my cameraman, I say, listen, man, this is a great story. Let's see if we can do it. We got the permission. But now getting to Bukavu, it took us most of a day flying the 2,000 kilometers from Kinshasa to Mbujimai, from Mbujimai to one or two other towns, and from there all the way to Bukavu. We arrived there about 4:30, 5 o'clock in the evening, and we go straight to this hospital, Panzi Hospital, the only one in Bukavu, and we arrived there. Because those days there was no email, there was no cell phones, especially in the Congo, you couldn't use cell phones, there's none. So we've decided, let's go there ourselves, see if we can get permission. We've arrived, we've made all this, we've come the distance, let's try. Get to the gate, and we asked the people that, listen, would like to do a story on this, what's happening here. And they said, okay, let's talk to the doctor in charge. Let's see, if he gives permission, it's fine. So they went. A few minutes later, guess who shows up? Dr. Dennis Mukwege Mukengere. He was the lone doctor treating these patients there at this hospital. He founded it, the Panzi Hospital. He founded it himself. And he was treated every day. And when we talked to him, he speaks heavily French accent. And we asked him for permission. Can we film? Can we tell the story of the world? Nobody knows the story. This was back in 2005, 2006. And he says, look, we will allow you only if you tell the real story. I said, look, if we can get permission from everyone here, we'll do it. Boom, just like that. We enter and start filming. I tell you, folks, the hospital maximum capacity, maybe 100 people. On this day, there was more than 700 women from the ages of 7 to 70. All of them raped by men in uniform. Imagine that for a moment. And this was their only place that they could find some solace, some peace. This was their refuge. And we got in there, and I'm telling you, the shock on our faces. So we asked the women if we could interview them, and they agreed. And I tell you, this is how it went. I'll come back to that. This is how it went. So Dr. Mukengere took us to one of the wards where women who had recently arrived were being treated. They ranged, like I said, from the age of 7 to 70. I noticed one young woman who appeared to be in her mid-30s, lying on the floor, staring at the ceiling. Dr. Mukengere told us her name was Tsinzi. She had been brought in by her teenage son in a wheelbarrow from her village, some 25 miles away. That's like 40 kilometers. It's like from Nairobi to Thika town in a wheelbarrow for a woman who had been repeatedly raped. I asked to speak to her, and she agreed. Cincy recounted how she had been gang raped by up to 15 soldiers for 3 days and left for dead. I was numb with shock, which quickly turned to anger. Dr. Mukengere saw my reaction and warned, "This is just one example. There are more and more stories right here in this compound." A few beds away, Dr. Mukengere pointed out another young woman. Her name was Bernadette Mulilenge. She told me how a knife had been inserted into her vagina after she had been gang raped repeatedly by about a dozen soldiers. When I asked why, her answer confirmed my worst fears. Because we belonged to the wrong tribe, and the soldiers didn't want us giving birth and populating the village. Think about that for a moment. As I asked the next question, what kind of human being would do such a thing? Bernadette, who was listening, tried to smile, and instead tears ran down her cheeks as she said, "At least we are still alive, at least for now. There are many others who didn't live, and many more who are being raped out there right now as we speak." It was frightening to say the least. A few beds away, I met 40-year-old Mpenzi, who recounted how she and her younger sister were raped by a group of soldiers for several hours. She told her sister not to resist, but she would not listen and kept fighting off the soldiers. One of the soldiers took out his gun, and while his fellow rapist held her legs apart, he shoved the weapon into her vagina and pulled back the trigger. Her sister screamed before he shot her again in the face. They continued raping Mpenzi as her sister lay dead beside her. This is not makeup, folks. This is not a movie. This is someone telling me firsthand what happened to them. We go on, and I was saying to myself, what kind of madness is this? These women were no different from my grandmother, my mother, my sisters, my aunts, and even my wife. Yet this was going on in the 21st century? Shame on every one of us, I thought. Shame on everyone who condoned such bestiality and savagery. Shame on those who knew and just looked the other way. Dr. Mukengere continued our tour of the hospital. We came to an enclosure used as a dining area. There were several hundred women gathered there in the enclosure, while about a dozen others were preparing dinner over huge open fires. When they saw their savior, they burst into a song in Kiswahili that went to the effect that, in translation, "We will not be moved. We will be battered and bruised, but we will not be moved." We kept filming the reactions of the women, all of the women in this compound, coming together for one reason, because they did not want to go back to their village. They were scared to go back. And we filmed until sundown. And as we packed our gear, Mpenzi, one of the women I told you about earlier on, she gained enough strength to get off her bed and walk outside. Leaning on a walking stick, she told me through an interpreter, "We know not all men are evil." She continued, "Thank you for being the voice of the voiceless." I could not hold back the tears. It was incredible. And then what I said to myself as we were going back to the hotel, what's going to happen to these women when they go back to their villages? Because eventually they would have to leave Panzi Hospital and head back to the village. What would happen then? Once we arrived back at the hotel, my story had practically written itself. It was a person-driven story, and I would let Cincy, Bernadette, Mpenzi, and Dr. Mukengere tell it all. I weaved their stories, and when I submitted the script for Proven in Atlanta, one of the executive producers called back and says, "Wow, Jeff, if the pictures are as powerful as you say they are, we have an amazing story." I was so angry, folks. That's one time, in journalism, you have to be objective in the stories you do. But this one time, you couldn't help but be subjective. But if it's told through the eyes of the witness, of the victims, then that's good enough. That evening, that same evening, the world learned about a tiny little hospital in eastern Congo, in South Kivu province, where both broken bodies and spirits were being healed and put back together by a Congolese hero and his team of equally heroic nurses. I learned later from my editor in Atlanta that his colleagues in the newsroom literally stopped everything they were doing to watch. The Bukavu story demonstrated the power of television and the human spirit's ability to mobilize. It did not matter that these were just a bunch of Africans. The story had resonated from the Congo to California. It was not just an African story, but a humane story, a story where everyone could empathize with. For more than 48 hours, the Bukavu rape story played over and over and over again. Here's the best part. People all over the world started responding. They couldn't believe that a lone doctor and his team of nurses were the only ones in this hospital where more than 700 victims of rape were being taken care of. So they started volunteering. They started sending everything from material to drips to clothes, and also volunteering their services. I'll take a month off. I'll take 2 months off. I will go to the Congo and help Dr. Dennis Mukwege Mukengere. Can you imagine one story having that reaction around the world? That is what good journalism is all about. That is why we do the things that we do. It was unbelievable. I still can't believe when I recall what we went through then. I keep saying to myself, count your blessings. Name them one by one, as my mother used to say, and it will surprise you what the Lord has done. So a couple of days later, the executive producers called me from Atlanta and they said, you know what? We need to take this story further. You can't just leave it as women being raped by soldiers and there's no accountability. What do you want to do, Jeff? How can you take it up? And I said, look, we can get a response from the government. I can call the president's office. I had been very close to Joseph Kabila. I can call him and see if he will see us. They said, good, do that and let us know. I picked up the phone. I dialed the president. Thank God he picked up the phone. And he told me, and he knew right away. He said, Jeff, I said, Mr. President, he says, I know why you're calling. I've been watching your story the last 24, 48 hours. And I said, thank you, Mr. President, but we need to interview you to get your reaction. He said, look, I'm in Lubumbashi right now. I'll be here for the next 2.5 days. If you can make it, you'll find me. If not, then I'm going to be away for a few days after that. And I said, Mr. President, we're on our way. Now, remember in the beginning, I told you, getting across a country the size of Eastern Europe with only 500 kilometers of roads, next to impossible. From Bukavu to Lubumbashi in the south, right next to the Zambian border, it's about plus minus 2,000 kilometers. How does one get there in 2.5 days? So we packed up our bags, went to the airport, and started inquiring, is there a flight today? Is there a flight today? Luckily, there was one later in the day. And we waited, and as usual, flight was delayed. Didn't arrive till about maybe 3-4 o'clock in the afternoon. Flying from Bukavu again through Mbuji-Mayi, 2 other places before Kinshasa. Another 3-4 hours. We didn't get back to Kinshasa until late in the evening, which meant we had missed the only flight of the afternoon to Lubumbashi. What does that mean? We had to go into Kinshasa, spend the night. And by the way, from Njili Airport in Kinshasa into the city, it's about 45, 50 kilometers. We go there, spend the night in a hotel, all the while praying that there's going to be a flight the next day to take us to Lubumbashi, because that's where we take up the story. And the next day, we wake up, head to the airport, arrive in good time, wait and wait and wait. Finally, that flight to Lubumbashi arrives. taxis, lands, the passengers come off, and we get on, and we're now heading. It's about 3 o'clock in the afternoon on the next day. Boom, heading to Lubumbashi. It's another hour and a half from Kinshasa. We arrive in Lubumbashi. Boom, straight to the president's palace. We arrive there and we tell the guards at the gate, the president has been waiting for us. This is who we are. Boom, boom. They say, wait. Sure enough, a few minutes later, they come back. They say, he will see you now. We walk into the huge compound, maybe about 10 acres. Nice, freshly mown grass, huge old trees. And there in the corner, underneath the shade, was Joseph Kabila. And we walk up, just like we walk up to him. And he's there saying, smiled at us and he says, I can't believe you made it. I say, Mr. President, you have no idea what we've been through. He says, well, you're here now. Let's do it. So I take out my laptop. I know he's watched the story the last couple of days, but I said, you know what? I want him to see it in front of us. Take off my laptop. The story is there. Put it for the president, give him some headphones. And he starts listening. And you could see the reaction on his face. Immediately, you could see the reaction. And that's the reaction I was looking for. And he turns to me. At the end of the story, he puts the headphones down and he turns to me. And before he says anything, I said, Mr. President, and I knew he had a twin sister, right? So here I go. I said, Mr. President, what if that was your mother? What if that was your twin sister? Those victims of rape there, mass rape by soldiers, your own soldiers. What would you do if that was your mother or your sister? And he gave me a look I will never forget. He says, you don't even want to know what I would do because I cannot describe it. And he kept staring at me. And I said, Mr. President, so why aren't you doing anything about it? Why are you letting those soldiers out there in South Kivu go about their business like that is a bandit country there? He says, Jeff, we're going to do something about it. I said, Mr. President, that's not good enough. You need to assure the people that you will do something. Arrest some soldiers. Make an example. By the way, the fact that he agreed to the interview, number one, that was phenomenal. The fact that he responded the way he did, that was also good, at least reassuring. And it also kept the story going, which is important. If a story as big as this, if you have continuity from the women being raped, the victims, the doctor treating them, and now the government, the president responding, that is real storytelling. That is why we do what we do. And we went on with the president. He kept responding, saying, answering my questions. And I pressed him. I pressed him all the way. I said, Mr. President, at the end of the day, it's up to you. The people will judge you on the things you do. Yes, Congo is huge and you can't control all of it all of the time. But you know what? Eastern Congo is turning out to be the badlands, the bandit territory, the no-go place. And if your soldiers don't get their act together, it could destroy the whole country. And it was advice for him, just whether take it or not. It was up to him. So we left it at that. We went back to Kinshasa that night. No, yeah, it was that night. No, the next day. It was the next day because there were no flights. And we filed our story. I'm telling you, folks, again, the reactions, again, the response. There was a lot of condemnation of what the government was doing or lack of what they were doing. But I'm telling you, it was a wake-up call. Let me take it a step further here. And this is why we do what we do. Several months later, I received an email from an organization in Bayeux, a town in southwest France. The people of Bayeux, especially the children, had seen my story and wanted to nominate it for an award along with other stories by journalists in the field of war that year. They felt that this qualified as war reporting and wanted my permission. I was touched and forwarded the email to the news editors in Atlanta and Moses, my cameraman, and told them the good news. 3 months later, I was emailed back and I was informed that the story had been voted the best overall and awarded the Prix Bayeux. By the way, this is it right here. It's called, and I'll read it for you, the Prix Bayou des correspondants de guerre for correspondents or reporters of war, 2006. This from the tiny village of Bayou in southwest France. Can you imagine? That's how much of an impact this story had, that some kids in some little town in south of west of France responded and gave us this award. I dedicated it to all the women and children of Bukavu who had been the victims of mass rape. By the way, there's more to this. Dr. Denis Mukwege, 2018, he was the joint winner of the Nobel Peace Prize. Can you imagine for his activities and the way he did what he did? He, along with an Iraqi activist, were awarded joint Nobel Peace Prize in 2018. Maybe our story had nothing to do with it in 2006. But I tell you, folks, things happen for a reason. And I was so happy for Dr. Denis Mukwege. Later on, there's more. The ICC, International Criminal Court, decided to use rape as a object of war, as a mass or criminal crime. Can you imagine? They included it in their list of crimes against humanity and war crimes, using rape as a weapon of war. That's how far it had gone. It's a huge step. Maybe not as big for the people on the ground in South Kivu and other parts of the Democratic Republic of Congo, but I'm telling you, at least it made a difference. And I hope it made a difference. I was so happy to see Dr. Mukwege get the Nobel Prize, because finally he got the recognition he deserved. After setting up that hospital so many years before, going about his daily business, literally healing these broken souls every day. You can imagine the kinds of examples he would see every day. And yes, he told us later on, the women would return to their villages after being healed and be raped again and would have to come back again. He says this for him was the worst part. And he was helpless. And I said, Doctor, you do your part, we'll do our part. Hopefully one day the government will do its part. It was one of the most touching stories I ever did. But the best part is the world responded. There was a reaction. There was a reason we do what we do. Yes, we could go through hell and back. Yes, we could go through all kinds of encounters. But always remember, those people on the ground are the ones who go through the worst of it. If you can make a difference in one person, just one person, then that's your job done. That is the irony of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Country so rich, so blessed, so wealthy, yet so tortured, so poor, so destabilized. And I'm sure those people who founded or who portioned out the Congo for themselves, they knew that if this country could be stable, the entire continent will be stable. Congo, the DRC, is the kingpin. It's the lynch point. One day, when the Congo gets its act together, this continent will thrive. And here's another postscript to all this story. You always wonder about the mighty Congo River that runs for more than 2,000 kilometers, all the way from Kisangani in the east, spilling all the way into the Atlantic Ocean. 2,000 plus kilometers. Huge, huge river. They call it Fleuve du Congo, mighty Congo River. There's a place where it spills over, a place called Matadi. It spills over into some huge falls. Experts once said that these falls, the waterfalls there, could light up all of Africa. Can you imagine? Could provide electricity for entire sub-Saharan Africa. This one river where this one falls. Can you imagine the potential? We haven't even talked about the huge forests, massive trees, massive potential. And yet, from 1960 That's when they gained independence. To today, 2020, 60 years of independence later, still one of the poorest, one of the most impoverished, one of the most destabilized countries on the continent. It makes you wonder, folks, what's it going to take? But if we can continue telling these stories ourselves, one day we will wake up. It's not someone from the outside who's going to wake up and do this. We have to do this from the inside out. That was chapter 12, Hope in the Most Unlikely of Places. Our journey continues next time on A Chapter a Day, as seen through my African eyes. Keep watching. Keep spreading the word live on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook, and yes, on YouTube at Koinange Jeff. Thanks so much for being a part of this. Please respond. Anything you say, will feel free to tell us. This is A Chapter a Day.